everyone, this is Izzy at Minerva. In today's pattern drafting series, we're looking at how to create a pleated top. We're going to be using our bodice, which is bespoke to you, which you've drafted with me in previous episodes. We're going to be adapting that to create pleats across the front and the back. This is a great little technique and I really hope you enjoy following along today. As ever with the pattern drafting series, you're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools, which are listed next to me. So go and grab those and then let's get started. To start off with, you need a copy of both your back and your front. We are going to be working on both of those pattern pieces together today because they're going to be sort of unified in a nice little way. So trace around your back and your front, and the easiest thing to do is to make sure, similar to me, that they are joining up here at the bottom of the arm side, and that your bottom of your waist is beautifully aligned as well, so they're forming a nice straight line. Don't forget your waist isn't running perpendicular to your centre, front or back, it is on a slight angle, isn't it? Okay. Brilliant. So once you've got that all sorted and you've traced over your block, the first thing we are going to draw in is we're actually just going to draw in our front panel line, and that's literally just going to be something that kind of comes along down here. So mark a point that is halfway along your waist between your side seam and your dart over here. Then mark a point that is about a third of the way along the arm side. Next, we're just going to draw in a line from the bottom about 5 or 6 centimetres up, and it's going to run parallel to the centre front line. And that's just so that we get a really nice straight line at the bottom of our little panel piece there. And then what I want you to do is just find a nice curve that joins that straight line up with your arm side line. After you've drawn that panel line, I want you just to mark a few locations where you can pop some notches into your pattern piece. So do that one at the bottom and then another one sort of almost up at the top up here, and those will be your reference lines when we come to sew those together. Next, I want you just to cut up the line you've just drawn. Excellent. Okay, we now want to close up our front bodice piece. So draw a line that's about a third of the way along your panel line and join that up with your apex. Cut along this new line you've just created and then cut out the volume of the bust dart. Remove that volume and close up the bust dart. Next, draw a line that is perpendicular to the centre back and aligns with the base of the back shoulder dart. Continue that line across to the arm side. But at this point, I want you just to drop that line at the arm side down by 1 centimetre. Then, from that 1 centimetre offset, continue that yoke line from the base of the shoulder dart across to the arm side. Cut along the new line you've just drawn to create your yoke. Remove the volume of the shoulder dart. So where we used to have the volume of the shoulder dart there, we're now just going to close that up and sellotape that down. What that does is it removes the volume that was there and actually puts it into this bit here, which is now going to become a separate seam to our back pattern piece. Now, the next thing that we need to do now we've done the back yoke is just repeat the same process for the front. So let's create the yoke for our front now. Okay, so we're going to draw a line that is 5 centimetres offset from the neck point. That's just an arbitrary point, so feel free to draw the line wherever you want. And then I want you just to simply draw a line that is straight across, perpendicular to the centre front. And very simply, this now becomes your front yoke line. You can now cut that piece out. We'll start by adding the pleat onto the back pattern piece. So measure the width of your back bodice. And for everybody that'll be different. Tap that into your calculator and then divide it by 3. Mark a point that is a third of the way across the back and mark it at the top up here. Do the same on your top yoke piece so that you've got a nice reference point for where these two are actually going to tie together. This is basically going to act as a little notch. Continue that line all the way down to the waistline. That then becomes your first pleat line. I then want you to draw 2 more pleat lines at 2 centimetres away from your first line. Continue those lines all the way down to your waistline. Wonderful, so at this point we've got our notches up here that correspond with where our pleat lines are going to go. So that piece is now prepped and ready to start cutting out and manipulating. However, I then want to repeat that process for our front. So we're going to do exactly the same with the pleats on here. Once again, I'm just going to very simply measure the distance from the arm site across to the centre front, pop that into my calculator and divide it by 3. And mark a point which is 1/3 away from the centre front for my first pleat. I'm then going to extend that line all the way down to my waist, making sure that I add a notch point at my front bodice yoke. Then going to continue to mark a further 2 pleat lines at 2 centimetre offsets. Now for some of you, as similar to mine, your pleats will go over the apex. That's absolutely fine. Don't worry about this dart. We'll sort that out in a minute. Okay, moving back to the back bodice, I then want to start cutting out these pleat lines. So cut along each of those pleat lines. Take a piece of paper and pop it underneath your block. Draw a line that is 4 centimetres offset from your first pleat line. And you should also have a nice, neat, straight line that cuts across the top of the sheet of paper as well. So draw that in as a nice reference. So we're going to be moving our back bodice piece and lining up with there, having added in 4 centimetres of volume at this point. However, this is just our first pleat, so we're going to want to add another one in. So cut out your second pleat line now. Stick that one in place at that 4 centimetre mark away from your first one and just sellotape that in place. For the next pleat, draw another line that is 4 centimetres offset from your piece of paper. And we're going to be adding that one in there, but then once again, cut out your next pleat first. And finally, draw your third line 4 centimetres away from your pleat again. Now effectively, when we sew it up, we're going to be joining these 2 bits together. So these bits of fabric join up together and we've then got a 4 centimetre pleat underneath. So the centre of these 2 are actually both going to line up with that notch up there. What is very helpful is actually to mark a notch in the middle of each of the pleats, because that will be the fold point to which you're going to sew along. So mark your notches at the midway points. So your back pattern piece is now done. We've added lots of volume into the back. It's going to be fitted across our shoulders, added the volume into the back for our 3 pleats, and then we're also going to add even more volume by tying in the back piece to this side of the front here. We're not going to remove the volume of the dart that was there. We're just going to make that all into one great big piece. So that way we're just adding loads of volume to the back. And that's the whole point of doing this exercise, is how to add volume to give a bit of swish and sway from the bust and from the back down to the waist. Okay, so let's cut up the first pleat of the front bodice. Put a piece of paper underneath. Draw in a line that is 4 centimetres offset from your first pleat line. Draw a nice straight line across the sheet of the paper which continues the line of the yoke. Then go and grab the remaining bit of your centre front and cut up the pleat line, the next pleat line. So this distance here is 4 centimetres. Then offset from the edge of that pleat 4 centimetre line again to add in that extra 4 centimetres that you need for the volume of the next pleat. Cut out the next pleat from your original bodice. So we've almost finished the changes that we need. However, we just need to close up this dart over here. So just pivot that along so that it opens up the top up here and closes this bit down here. Measure the distance between the top of the opening of the pleat up here and the top of the pleat over here. And I want you just to mark the midpoint along this line. Draw a line from there up to the midpoint, and then it continues across like that. Next, at the apex, I want you to mark the midpoint of the volume that you've added into that pleat. So that should be 2 centimeters at that point. And then basically, effectively, you've then got your fold line here. This will be where your fold line is. So this location up here is your fold line where the 2 bits of fabric are going to fold in together, and that's going to line up with that notch there. Mark your other central notches, and these should be 2 centimeters along the extra pleat volume that you've added. And those notches will then tie in corresponding with that one and this one with the central one there. Brilliant. So it looks complicated, but when we sew it together, it's going to be absolutely fine. Let's trace around our pattern pieces now together. So grab a piece of tracing paper and pop it over your block that you've adapted, and we'll start off with the front bodice piece up here. Nice and simple. We're going to add a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance to our shoulder seam, and then we're also going to add our 1.5 centimeter seam allowance to the bottom of the yoke at this point. We don't need to add a seam allowance anywhere else, so just trace around the armscye, the neck and the centre front. Add your annotation to say place on fold. Grain line runs parallel with your centre front. Pleated top, front yoke, cut 1 on fold. The only other bit of annotation we need to add is these notches, so just extend them down to your seam allowance, because then you'll be able to cut into them when you cut your fabric out. Excellent. Let's move on to the bottom of the bodice front. Trace along your centre front line. Draw in your new waistline. No seam allowance to this one. Now this panel piece has got a bit of a curve on it, so you may just want to offset 1.5 centimeter offsets along from the block, so you get a nice smooth curve when you add your seam allowance. Draw in the base of the armscye, and now we're going to add our 1.5 centimeter seam allowance to the top of this particular piece so that it can tie in with our front yoke. Okay, I then want you to add in all of your notches. So for me, I'm going to add 3 for every pleat that we're doing, 1 to either side, and then a central one as well. For my pattern piece, I might actually go one step further and just make this like a little bit clearer. You can annotate this however you want. What that's doing is just reminding me that those 2 notches go together to that one, that creates a set of 3, that's a set of 3, and that's a set of 3. Brilliant. Okay, so the only other notches that we want to add to this are our side seam notches. Do you remember we added those in so they tie in with these pieces over here? So just mark those in, and then add your place on fold line. Grain line runs parallel with your centre front. Pleated top, front bodice, cut 1 on fold. Excellent. Let's move on to the back bodice pattern piece now. Add your seam allowance to your shoulder seam and also to the bottom. Draw in your armscye and your side seam, allowing a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance so that we can open up the top when we put it on, and draw in your neckline. Grain line runs parallel with the centre back. Pleated top, back yoke, cut 2, and then add your notch lines as well. Moving on to our main centre back piece, draw in your 1.5 centimeter seam allowance to the centre back and also to the top. Draw in the armscye, and don't forget to continue it all the way around. Mark in your 1.5 seam allowance to the curve of this panel piece. Draw in your notches while you're at it, and then draw in your waist. Next, draw in your pleat lines and your notches for the top. Again, annotate these however you find it easiest to annotate them. Grain line runs parallel with the centre back. Pleated top, back bodice, cut 2. Excellent. Now it's time to go and cut out the tracing paper pattern pieces and then cut it out of calico, making sure to transfer your notches, which are going to be really critical for sewing this pattern piece up together. Lovely. Okay, so we've got our back pieces and our 2 front pieces. We're going to start off with our back pieces and sew those together first. Okay, so we've got 2 pleated top back bodice pieces. We're going to be doing the same technique for both. So let's talk you through one and then you can just repeat the process for the second one. So as you can see, we've got a number of pleats and I've cut them out with notches like this. And fundamentally, we basically just want to join that side into the middle. So this side needs to be folded and aligned with the middle like that. We're then just going to pin it in place. And likewise with our second notch over here, that is going to fold over, be folded like that and brought into the middle as well. Okay, so you can immediately see that we're starting to get volume added into the bottom, but we're pinning it in at the top. Let's repeat that process for the next couple of notches. And fold at 1 notch and bring it, I'm going to have to tilt it around this way so I can do it a bit more easily. Fold at 1 notch and bring it into the middle. Do make sure you're getting this as accurate as you can. And then fold at that notch and bring it into the middle. Okay, and then for our final one, which is over here, bringing that one, folding it and bringing it into the middle notch. And likewise, taking that one, folding along where the notch is and making sure the notch lines up with that middle notch. Lovely. So it's beginning to kind of take shape. Once we iron that and press it, it's going to look absolutely gorgeous. But there you go. You can kind of see the shape that it is starting to take up. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to baste that in place using a long stitch length that is 4 or 5 mil long on your sewing machine, and all that does is it just holds the pleats together as we sew them before we sew them to the yoke. I'm going to baste mine in place just within the seam allowance, so just within or just less than 1.5 centimeters from the raw edge, or just within 5/8 of an inch of the raw edge. Okay, so that's just holding it in place really nicely. I'm just going to take one of my back yoke pattern pieces, and don't forget that it's got these 3 little notches at the bottom down here, and those 3 notches should line up perfectly with the middle of each of these pleats. So line those up and pin that in place, and then we're going to sew it. I'm just flipping it over so that I can see really clearly where the centre of my pleats are, so that I can line up my notches beautifully. Let's sew that together now using our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance and our standard stitch length. And ideally at this point, you really want to be pressing that seam allowance down towards the bottom, but you may just find there's too much bulk there and it just really doesn't want to do that. So if you're feeling like it's just wanting to press up, that's fine. Press it however you think it needs to be. Repeat that whole process for the other back side next. Next, we're going to move on to our pleated front bodice top. So with the wrong side facing up, we're just going to repeat that whole process of finding our notches and folding them into the middle notch for each pleat. Great, once you've done one side, you can then repeat the same for the other side. Lots of pins there. Why don't we go away and baste that in place now? Oh, it looks so pretty. Perfect. Once you've done that, let's get our yoke for our front piece. And don't forget, again, it's got these 3 little notches on each side, which will align beautifully with the centre of each of the pleats. So let's get that in place. Pop that over right sides together and just pin away. Let's sew that in place now. Brilliant, that's looking so cute now, isn't it? Right, let's just finish this off by putting right sides together. We're going to just pin along this side seam here. We've got a couple of notches, literally a couple, so we can line things up, and then don't forget that there is a curve here, so we're expecting to have to ease it in slightly. Brilliant. Once you've pinned the side seam, just do the shoulder seam. And then we're just going to repeat that process for this side. Pin the side seams in place, and then the shoulder seam. Sew those 4 seams in place. Beautiful. All right, now that you've sewn those seams, you can then press them open. It has a really lovely aesthetic. Just adding that volume into our top is really fun, isn't it? We spent so long over the last couple of weeks looking at how to keep everything as fitted and as close as possible that it's really nice to see the effect of adding volume back in. But it's adding it in a way that is still fitted and is still going to work well with your body and your body dimensions. So thank you for joining me today. I've been Izzy at Minerva. We've had lots of fun looking at how to create a pleated top today. As ever, if you've got any thoughts or comments, feel free to pop them below the video. We always love to hear from you here at Minerva. And if you'd like to create a free account on our website, you can also upload your photos and tell us about your pattern drafting journey so that we can see it as well. We would absolutely love to see your progress, so please do share with the community where you're up to. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time.